I'm deeply grateful to be here. I was saying to the group when I was speaking a little bit earlier today, let's see if this puppy will come up first. It always makes me so happy when the technology works. There we are. I love it. I learned, very early on that there were two things that I was told if I worked to deeply cultivate would serve me very well in recovery and in my life. And those two things, among others, but to really deeply work to cultivate these two things have served me very well. And one of those is gratitude, right? To deeply cultivate a sense of gratitude. And the other one is honoring lineage, honoring my lineage in so many ways and in so many paths. So I want to start with gratitude. I'm deeply grateful to be here. I'm deeply grateful that I was asked to be a part of this conference, and I'm deeply grateful for all of you and that all of you are here. And then I go back and think about my ancestry and my ancestors and the folks that worked, and were so resilient and brilliant in their path, and how they carried a lot of weight on on their shoulders so that I could be right here, right now, and doing the things that I'm doing in my life. So all of that ancestry, along with, I think about my lineage in yoga and my yoga path and all my teachers in yoga. And it's important for me to give gratitude to all of those as well. As I was saying a little bit earlier, I've learned that when I make my gratitude bigger than my fear or bigger than my sadness, or most importantly, bigger than my opinion, then it's possible for another perspective to open up. It's possible for some things to open up. So, I always want to start there and say how deeply grateful I am. And I want to continue to cultivate the quality of gratitude in all places in my life. The title of this workshop is Healing Addiction, a Yogic Perspective. And a lot of this comes out of my lived experience in both addiction and recovery, and the many learnings that have been a part of adding to what I love to call a sustainable platform for addiction recovery, and how the teachings of yoga have so deeply added to creating a sustainable platform. I won't say a whole lot about my life and my history here. I did a little more of that in the workshop that we did a little bit earlier this afternoon. But I do want to give you a brief introduction to me, since many of you, this is our first time meeting. And I usually say it this way, and I've always said, I don't care where I'm speaking, I'm going to do the same introduction. And I used to always say, I don't care if I was speaking at Harvard Medical School. And then 2 years ago, I actually spoke at Harvard Medical School. And I did do the introduction the exact same way. And I say, I'm Nikki. I'm an addict. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a codependent. I'm the survivor of both childhood and adult sexual trauma. I'm a love addict. I'm a recovering debtor spender. And again, I'll say it again, the big word here out of all the rest of those words, the big word is and, right? And I'm a MBA. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner. I'm a yoga therapist. I am the founder of Y12SR. I'm the mother of 2 living and 1 deceased child. I'm the grandmother of 5. I'm actually the great-grandmother of 3, right? And I love saying all those things in the same sentence, because both sides of that equation is who I am, right? That's all a part of who I am. And here's really, again, the big sentence with all that. while all of those things inform my experience and inform my walk in this plane of existence, none of them define me. None of them. I'm so much more than all of that. None of those things really define me, right? But they do inform this experience. And this journey has been about, how do I reintegrate all parts of myself? What I discovered is, if I make one part of myself bad, awful, and wrong, and say that's horrible, and then praise and exalt another part of myself, what I do is create a split. That there's an internal war that happens inside here. And that war is the antithesis of yoga. Yoga means union. It means integration. It means wholeness, right? And that's the exact opposite of that. That's a split, right? So this journey has been about, how do I reintegrate all parts of myself? How does the healing become possible, where it's possible to hold all that? Where it's possible to hold, as we were saying in the workshop a little earlier, can I create the container big enough to hold angst and fear? Can I create a container big enough to hold love, to hold courage, to hold all of these things all at the same time? And so we're going to talk about how yoga has been a path, has supported a path toward creating this bigger container. And we'll talk about this in the context of both yoga and, in the gratitude piece. One of the things I neglected to say here is the gratitude for the 12-step program, right? And the 12-step program really has been the basis of what served as a platform for recovery for me. So I always thank the founders of the 12-step program as well, who are Dr. Bob and Bill W. So with that, we'll go a little bit more into the depth of the material for this evening. I usually start this presentation out with a chant. And I love this chant. It's one that I learned a while back. It's a chant to Ganesha, right? And we're going to talk about obstacles. We're going to talk about obstacles in the path, right? So I always love bringing in Ganesha as, this is the obstacle remover. And in the conversation we're going to have, we hope to bring in and invoke the obstacle remover. So I always say, if you know this chant, please do it with me. And if you don't, just know that what this is about is invoking the energy of Ganesha as the obstacle remover. Om. 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 Gananantva Ganapatigum Havamahe Gavim Gavinam Upamastra Jestirajam Brahmanam Spata Anahashrunvanutibisi Desadanam Shri Maha Ganapataye Namaha. Thank you. Thank you. And then I always love to start out with this prayer from the 12-step program. Oh, did it go away? What? I didn't even know. All right. There's a prayer from the 12-step program that we often use that's called the set-aside prayer. We call it the set-aside prayer. And what it says is, please help me to set aside everything I think I know so that I may have an open mind and a new experience. Please help me to see the truth, right? And I love to start my day out with that prayer. Help me to set aside everything I think I know, because the things I think I know are usually the things that get in the way. One of my big things that I tell myself over and over again is, I don't even know what I don't know, right? And so it's important for me, in a sense of developing and cultivating a quality of humility to remember that I don't even know I don't know. So I love this prayer as a part of this as well. All right, we're back. Yay. Bless you. So we'll start in now, just for a brief period of time. We're going to first begin this by taking a look at the yogic view of dis-ease. And I love that hyphen between the word dis-ease, right? From between dis-ease and wellness. And I love this distinction, right? I've discovered more and more is in deepening awareness, which has been one of the gifts of yoga for me, deepening levels of awareness. As they deepen their distinctions that I've discovered that I really, really need to develop. And this is one of those that I think is very applicable to this conversation. It's the distinction between healing and curing, right? That those are two different things. And this work comes from a woman named Patricia Reese, where these words come from. And I love the way that she makes these distinctions here. She first talks about curing, and she says, this is what we usually ask doctors to do, right? And it's usually an external treatment that masks a problem or eliminates some symptoms. The treatment doesn't necessarily address the underlying factors of the illness, right? And then the distinction is there with healing, that healing is something different, right? That healing, the bigger meaning of it is actually holing, W-H-O-L-I-N-G, holing, becoming whole, or filling out the missing pieces to become whole once again. And I love the distinction here. It says sometimes this may even mean facing death in a more fully realized way. That holing is an opportunity to come more fully and deeply into life. In my own life, here's an example of this. And several years ago, many years ago, as a matter of fact, I was actually diagnosed with hepatitis C. Right? And here's the real beauty of that whole thing now. There actually is a cure for hepatitis C now. I know many people, in my own life that have died from the dis-ease of hepatitis C. But today, there is a medical cure for hepatitis C. Now, it takes a lot to get it. Right? You have to I had to, bring out a little collie in me to have everything needed in order to get the medical, because it's very expensive. And the medical profession doesn't, the insurance companies don't want to freely offer it. So you really have to be an advocate for yourself and really fight to get it. And I did, right? And I'm very grateful for that. So I took the prescribed protocol, and this time last year, I received a letter from my physician that said, we've done this testing, and there is now 0.01% of this virus in your body. And the letter actually said, we pronounce you cured. Right? And that's a miraculous thing. And again, such deep gratitude for that. But that's different from healing, because I know if I go back and repeat the same behaviors that contracted the way that I contracted hepatitis C, that I could get that all over again, right? Healing and curing are two different things, right? I'm not healed from that. Cured, yes. But there's a distinction between those two things. Does that make sense? Yeah, that there's a distinction. So we want to remember that healing and curing are two different things, that there's a distinction between those things, right? So I'm going to say this right up. My Sanskrit sometimes sounds a little bit like Alabama, a little bit like Georgia, a little bit like, so forgive me. When I was doing a teacher training, we learned to chant the Yoga Sutras. We would always chant a forgiveness prayer before we started and after we finished, because we knew we were going to destroy the words. So please, please forgive me in this. But I love this concept, particularly as we speak, what we're speaking to here. Okay, prajnapadita. Close. What it means, let's just go there, is crimes against wisdom, right? Crimes against wisdom, right? And Ayurveda says this is the root cause of all disease, that all disease is a crime against wisdom. It's spoken of as insufficient life force, either in the body as a whole or blockage in some part of the body, right? Impeded energy flows that create stagnation and accumulations of toxins. It's said that this process reverts through purification. And purification means we remove the contaminants. We remove the contaminants, right? To bring us back more toward pure living, pure thinking, making healthy choices, purity and reverence, breaking the usual chain of events. So we think about this, and there's this idea, right? This what we call ama. Right? And I love speaking about this in this context of healing as well. Ama is said to be anything that exists in our 5-body system. So earlier in the workshop today, we were introducing the motto from the Upanishads that speak of us as having 5 bodies, not 1, but 5 bodies, right? Our physical structure, right? Our energy body, our intellect, the mind, right? The character, the personality, and the heart, right? The heart body. And it's said that any time that there are toxins across any one of those bodies that accumulate, that a byproduct can generate from that. So the Sanskrit word literally means uncooked, undigested, unresolved, unfinished, or incomplete, right? That's how the word ama is translated. So it's poison or toxin that sits across any one of those bodies. And that's an interesting thing to think about, right? If I have a severely upset stomach, right, I might run out to find something to relieve the pain because it hurts. It's painful, right? Part of the thing I was speaking to earlier, so often we confuse relief and resolve. We confuse those two things. I might run out and find something for relief, but that may not resolve the underlying problem that was causing the toxins to accumulate, that was causing the undigested food in the belly, or whatever it is that was causing that bellyache. So, once again, that's something when it's an undigested, maybe food in the belly. What if it's an undigested experience in our life, right? What if it's an undigested experience in our life? That's painful too, and that hurts, right? So I want something to relieve the pain, right? And, and I may use some things to relieve that pain that may overall continue to develop toxins and continue to create poisons across the rest of my systems. So we often use this metaphor that was given to me in the teachings that I've received, that I've always loved to use relative to this framework of addiction and addiction behavior. And the way that my teacher transmitted this to me was as the metaphor of the imperfect vessel. And he was speaking, he talked about how the ancients used vessels to carry liquid from one place to another. They needed to get water from one place to another. And so they were very, very aware and very cognizant of when a vessel was imperfect. And they had all these ways to describe the imperfect vessel. And one of the ways that they talked about it was an upside down vessel. And it was so funny when my teacher was delivering this teaching to me, he was speaking about a vessel like a vase, but my mind went to vessel like a ship in the ocean. That was where I went with it, right? And so what he talked about first was the upside down vessel. And of course, if the vessel is upside down, it won't hold water, right? You can't get the precious liquid from one place to another. That's one kind of imperfect vessel. Another kind of imperfect vessel is the dirty vessel, right? It's full, so it's going to contaminate the precious liquid that we're holding within the vessel. Or there's the leaky vessel, as it's described, right? So the liquid is going to leak out. And then there's the tilted vessel, which wouldn't hold the water or the precious liquid as well. Now, again, when he was delivering this teaching, when my teacher was delivering this teaching, first of all, my mind went to a ship as a vessel instead of a vase or a container. It went to a ship. And really, a lot of what I thought about was how this applied to me. And actually, the teaching does apply to us as a vessel. We're the vessel for spirit, right? So it's applying to us as a vessel. And my first thought was how in my own life, addiction turned my vessel upside down, right? So the imperfect vessel, the upside down vessel, is one that has a closed mind, right? Unable to see the condition that's in front of them, unable to see the reality of the condition in front of them. So here's an upside down vessel, right? Surely it's not going to, that's looking pretty dangerous when the vessel is upside down. And I say this, it's true. Addiction turned my vessel upside down. For some 30 years, I was in the water, absolutely upside down, unable to see the reality of the condition. Right? The next vessel is the dirty vessel. So the dirty vessel is heavy, it's full of debris, it's disturbed by physical, emotional, physiological, and spiritual toxicity. So here we have a dirty vessel, right? It doesn't look very pleasant to sail in that dirty vessel. The next one is the leaky vessel. The leaky vessel allows impurities to enter or valuable contents to escape. And here's a leaky vessel, all right? You're not going to get very far. We're not going to move very far forward in a leaky vessel. And then there's the tilted vessel. The tilted vessel will hold some part of the load, but will often lose a portion of it. It may make progress, but over time, it may relapse and go back into the same condition. And here's a tilted vessel. That one doesn't look very fun to sail in either, right? There's the tilted vessel. What we're really hoping for is to develop a solid vessel. And when we're in that condition, as I was for many years, where the condition had me upside down, where I was sitting in the water upside down, what's first required is righting that upside down vessel. And what that requires is establishing a strong and solid base, a strong and solid foundation. And once that vessel is back right side up, then the vessel has to be cleaned out. It has to be repaired. In my own life, I was floating in the water upside down for some 30 years, right? Now my vessel's back right side up. It's still full of crap because it's been in the water upside down for all this time. So I have to spend some time to clean that vessel out and prepare it for sail. Make it sail worthy and prepare it for sail, right? We call that, I speak about this because very often this is how we'll work with body in some of the work that I do in the world, which is called Y12SR, the Yoga of 12-Step Recovery. on our mats and in our lives, we're working to cultivate solid foundation, right? And as we sweep our vessel out and do the work to prepare it for sail, we call that core, right? That work, that's core work. And then lastly, we want to monitor our vessel to support it so it can properly stay on course. We call that sustainability or expression, right? And so when we're working with body on the mat, we look to really find foundation and core and expression in all our postures in our life, right? All our postures in our life, on and off the mat. And this very much relates to the 12 steps, right? The 12 steps, of course, came around in like 1935, right? And have been a foundational piece for addiction recovery for many, many years and have served thousands and thousands of people. So as we work with this combination of yoga and the 12 steps, we talk about the steps in this way, right? On both as we work on and off the mat. So step 1 through 3 of the 12-step program are what are often called the foundation steps. They are the cognitive work at the cognitive level that support righting that upside down vessel, right? Turning that vessel back right side up and preparing it for sail, right? Those are steps 1 through 3. And steps 1 through 3, what they really relate to is admitting the life-threatening nature of the problem that's in front of us. And that's a very important thing to do because you cannot heal what you do not acknowledge. If I pretend like it's not there, if I repress it, deny it, ignore it, any of those things, there's no possibility for healing. You can't heal what you don't acknowledge. So first, this is where we admit the life-threatening nature of the problem. We recognize that the root of the problem is misperception, that the root of the actual problem is misperception. And you know, I always love to think about that because we hear that in yoga all the time, right? The motto of the kleshas and avidya, right? Avidya is misperception, right? It's false understanding, right? And Patanjali says that that's the root of our problem, are these seeds of disconnection. And the founders of the 12-step program are saying the exact same thing, that the root of the problem is this false understanding. The root of the problem is this we misperceive who we are. We misperceive who we are. And then it says we need to relinquish control, right? One of my mentors always says when you're really treating addiction, what you're treating is what she calls the big C. And the big C is the illusion of control, right? In the throes of addiction, I'm looking to manipulate outcomes. I want to manipulate how I feel. I want to manipulate how I think you think about me. I want to manipulate all these things. It's trying to manipulate outcomes, right? And so this says we surrender that. We surrender that sense of control. We turn that over. And then the rest of the steps actually say that the remedy is spiritual, that it's a spiritual remedy. You know, I love thinking about this because a lot of the ways now that we see addiction being approached in the world, particularly from the standpoint of the pharmaceutical industry or the American medical industry, right? They're pushing a lot of pharmacological solutions on this. And the big problem with that is you'll never have a pharmacological solution to a spiritual crisis. It's not possible. And at its root, I assert that addiction's a spiritual crisis, that this is a spiritual crisis, right? So, and the 12-step program says that the remedy for this is spiritual. So steps 4 through 9 in the 12-step program are where we begin to take a deep look at what blocks us from spirit, right? What are those obstacles that block spirit from moving through this vessel, right? What are those things? So steps 4 through 9 is where we begin to do that core work to take a deep look at what those things are. And we become open to transformation through self-acceptance, through radical compassion for self and for others, to cultivate those qualities in this effort of cleaning that vessel out and preparing it for sale. And then steps 10 through 12 are what are called our tools for growth. These are the sustainability steps. There are tools for growth, for awareness, for responsibility, for action, for service, right? All of these things. And the reminder that this is practice in all areas of our life, not just when we're in a room or in a church basement or on our mats. Is practice in all areas, off our mat into our lives, is practice in all areas of our lives. So the 12-step program, I've always liked this analogy. Steps 1 through 3 are where we give up. We recognize, we surrender, right? We have to surrender this false perception, right? All of these things. Steps 4 through 7 are where we clean up. We're sweeping that vessel out, right? We're looking at what blocks us. Steps 8 and 9 are where we make up, right? Because in the course, in the throes of my addiction, I have really done damage to relationships in my life. So I got to do the work to set my relationships right. Do the work to set the relationships right. So these are where we make up. And then my favorite part is steps 10 through 12. And this is where we grow up, right? We grow up. So the 12-step program supports us in this healing. So how does this all fit in with the ancient wisdom of yoga? Now, I want you to recognize that this is, in a way, it's not meant to be total. It's a way for us to begin to think about how some of these tools from yoga can really support us in creating a sustainable platform for addiction recovery for anyone, right? For ourselves, to support us in helping others in this as we become aware and we become skilled in this process. So we know our constitutions, the doshas, right? Kapha, Pitta, Vata, right? And what sits underneath those are what's called the vital essences, right? And those are Ojas, Tejas, and Prana. And what I was looking to do with this is to begin to have us a way to think about particular stages of recovery, right? Now, we need this in all areas, of course, and we need balance within them. But at particular points in time, in particular stages of recovery, there's some things here that I would assert can support a particular stage of recovery. In that first stage where we're working to turn that vessel right side up and prepare it for sale, we want to build ojas, right? We want to build. So our next slide talks about these things. Ojas is the primal vigor, the deep vitality that brings mental stability, peace of mind, that supports immunity. So in those early stages, it becomes advantageous for us to support building using tools to build those qualities, right, in the early stages of recovery, because that's going to support our vessel as it turns back right side up. Right now, in that second stage where we got steps 4 through 9, we're doing work. We're preparing that vessel for sale, right? We're doing that work. We're going in there. We're cleaning that vessel out. We're repairing the leaks. Here is where I might create practices and do work to build tejas, right? Tejas is the inner radiance, right? It's the way through which we digest our thoughts, our impressions. It builds courage. And this is a point in the recovery process where we really need courage. We need courage. We need fortitude. So maybe practices that support building that fortitude and courage when someone is working in those steps can support someone through what can be a really challenging piece of the work in order to create sustainable recovery. right? And then the 10 through 12, those later stages, right? So the idea is how these can relate to foundation, core, and expression or sustainability. Here in those later stages, in steps 10 through 12, prana, right? And building practices that support prana. Coordination of breath, mind, and senses. It governs development of our higher perceptual capacities, right? So here we might want to think about practices that support that, right, in this. So just as a way of thinking around these things that we found really support these things. So I want to talk a little bit about foundation, about the foundation pieces of this. So in order to establish foundation, again, I was talking about this a little earlier in the workshop. One of the things that's required, right, is radical honesty, right? We need a sharpened awareness. And again, we say that practices that support building ojas might support us within this quality. Radical honesty is so important. I gave this an analogy a little bit earlier. You know, it's easy to fool ourselves or convince ourselves. It's easy, I know, from my mind to rationalize and justify and make excuses and do all of those things, right? And this work requires a radical honesty, right? And oftentimes that means working with someone else as a mirror to support us in that radical honesty. But we can't get anywhere without it. The analogy that I love is that if I call up Delta Airlines right now and I say, I want to go to San Francisco, they're going to say, well, yeah, we have flights. We got planes that'll go to San Francisco, but they're going to ask the question, where are you? And if I tell them that I'm in Chicago when I'm actually in Nassau, I'm never going to get to San Francisco, right? There's no way I can ever get. So I got to tell the truth about where I am before there's any possibility to get to where it is that I want to go. That's a requirement. There needs to be this requirement of radical honesty. So we talk about the dis-ease of addiction, right? And here's the deal, right? On this one, I assert that anything that I use to escape a perceived intolerable reality is something that could turn into an addiction. Anything that I use to run away, yoga says stay present. It says stay in this present moment. And anything that I use to escape the present moment is something that has the possibility to turn into an addiction, right? And then the question becomes, how do you know? How do you know, right? When I use it, even though I know better, that's one way to think about it. How do I know I've strayed into the realm of addiction, right? How do I know that I've done that? I use it when I know better, right? I use whatever it is, even when I don't want to, right? That's how I begin to know that maybe I've crossed this line. Maybe I've crossed the line, right? And so we often use this in one of the treatment centers that I have done a lot of work at. It's called Shades of Hope. And they use this in the family week environment to describe to families this disease of addiction. And they use this graphic, and we call it the umbrella of addiction. And you see, you know, there are lots of things that can fit in that umbrella. We got illegal and prescription drugs. We've got gambling. We've got caffeine. We've got nicotine. You know, this was one of my favorite. We got, it did it, right? That's power. I told you I like to play with PowerPoint, right? Power and control, right? You know, and if we look at really, particularly in the United States, a lot of what's going on in the United States, right? Even with things like relative to the Me Too movement, right? The cause of all of that is an addiction to power. It's an addiction to power. And what we see at play a lot now is an addiction to power, right? So power and control, a big, big one, right? part of the root of this thing. So you got many other things in there. You've got sex, you've got relationships, you've got gambling. I always say you have shopping, daggone it, because I love to shop, right? But I know, right? And I can feel it in my body when I cross that line. When I'm using my trip to Nordstrom's or Macy's to buy something, to reach outside of myself to fulfill what can only be filled from the inside, right? I'm looking from the outside for something from the outside of me to fulfill what's really only can be worked on from the inside, that only can be resolved from the inside. Right, so you got exercise. Now here's the deal with these. There's nothing wrong with any of these, right? We're not even in the domain of good, bad, right, wrong, right? We're not in the binary of good. There's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with it, right? But too much is a problem. Sometimes with these, too little may be a problem, right? The point is that it's the middle path, right? We speak of this in the 12-step program as the wisdom to know the difference. Right? It's that middle path, too much, too little. It's my relationship with these things that are the problem, not the things themselves that are the problem, right? All right, work. There's a big one. Oh my goodness, right? And some of these we applaud in our culture and say, oh my goodness. But I've seen work addictions. I don't know about you, but I know I can become addicted to busy. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Right? I use that as a distraction so I don't have to go in. I can use that as a distraction. Right? So the point is this is covering something, right? We say it's core pain, trauma, right? Ama, the word we saw a little bit earlier, is covering something, right? And, I usually talk about how, if you're a therapist in the United States, therapists diagnose from this thing called the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, right? And 3 or 4 years ago now, the newest DSM came out. And when it came out, there were many things listed in that relative to addiction that weren't listed in the previous version of that manual, that were diagnosable as addiction. And what I always assert is that when the next one comes out, whenever that is, there's going to be a whole nother set of things that we haven't even thought about that could be listed under there as addictions, right? Because anything that I use to escape a perceived intolerable reality, anything that I use to escape the present moment is something that has the possibility to turn into an addiction, right? And if I don't deal with what's underneath there, all I'll do is play what we often call whack-a-mole, right? And I know this because I did it for years, right? I dealt with the drugs and alcohol, and then sex popped up. And I dealt with that, and then shopping and money popped up. And I dealt with that one, and I was looking again for relief from those things rather than resolve for what was sitting underneath it. One of the things I think I assert by bringing yoga into this mix, it helps us to get underneath more deeply at what's sitting underneath here, what's really sitting underneath any addiction. All right, so I'm not going to go into this in any real depth here. We did that a little bit in the presentation, but this is the model, the 5-body model I was speaking to a little bit earlier. And it comes from let's see if I can do this one right, Taittiriya Upanishad. Did I do that okay? Yay! All right. And it speaks about 5 bodies, right? So there's the physical body, which is the structure. This is the body made of food. You are what you eat. Right? We really are what we eat, which is why some of our conversations around eating were so relevant to this whole domain, right? And the next one is the pranamaya kosha, which is the energy body, right? I oftentimes say when you go to a physician, they take your vitals. It's this sense of measuring energy in our system. Then there's the manomaya kosha, which is the intellect or the thinking body, right? And really, we were speaking a little bit earlier, the function of this one is to coordinate what comes in via our 5 senses, which is the only way things get in here, is via the 5 senses. So it coordinates all that sensory input. And then there's the V Gianna Microtia. If Mana Microtia coordinates outside in, V Gianna Microtia coordinates inside out. So these are our values, right? Our intuition, our psycho-emotional states, right? The yogis speak of this. And then there's the Anandamaya Kosha, right? Which is our spiritual heart, right? Spoken of as the heart body, but this isn't the blood pump, right? This is the heart that is the seat of love and joy and intimacy and devotion. And while this is a model, right, and really, truthfully, there is no separation between these things. They're really all the same things. This is a useful model for us to begin to look at this. And what the ancients speak of is that the ideal condition is that there's a sense of alignment, there's a sense of connection between and among all of these things. And when there's not, when that goes away, and it happens often, then disease, dysfunction, disharmony, and all those things can more readily enter into our system. So I was speaking about this one a little bit earlier in the workshop that we were together with a little bit earlier. How what the ancients say that what we have to work with, right? What we have to work with we got three things, and that's probably about it. Three things we can really work with. And those are our thoughts, our speech, and our actions, right? We can work with those. I can't work with anybody else's thoughts or speech or actions, but I have the capacity to work with my thoughts, my speech, and my actions. My teacher calls these our inner cities, and I love that little phrase. These are our inner cities, right? And what happens with this is that when there's a sense like this Venn diagram, when there's this sense of balance between them, there's access into, I can get more of a deeper sense of who I really am, of true self, right? Sense of true self, right? And I know, and what I love about this is it gives me a way to think about the very important quality of integrity. Right. One of the things that I've discovered in my own path of recovery, and relapse is a part of my experience in recovery. And I discovered that I relapse when I'm out of integrity with myself, that causes such a painful condition inside of me that I want to relieve that with something to cover it because it hurts. Right. So I have to be pretty vigilant about being in integrity with myself. And I loved it when this was the teaching that I received about what integrity really is. According to the teachings that I received, integrity means that my thoughts, my speech, and my actions are aligned with my values, right? With those ethical values, with my values. When my thoughts and my speech and my behavior are aligned with my values, then I'm in integrity with myself. But when they're not, I'm out of integrity, and that causes such a painful state. So I looked at this, and what we often see with this is me playing with PowerPoint again. I love to do this stuff, right? Oops, it didn't do it. Shoot. Let's see if it goes. Goodness. Let's try it again. My playing with PowerPoint failed, all right? What it's supposed to show is all of those things collapse on each other. One condition is all like thought, speech, behavior, all collapse on each other. And the example I often give of this, if you ever start having a great day, everything's turning out wonderful, it's turned out to be a great day. And then all of a sudden this little random thought comes through. And I was telling the group earlier, mine is usually something about my dog, right? My dog is getting to be older, and the thought that Roxy, my 6-pound Chihuahua, is ever going to leave me, right, just throws me into a tizzy, right? I adore my dog, right? And so that thought comes floating through, and it all of a sudden just ruins this great day. Anybody know what I'm talking about? This random thought will come through. Everything was great, and now it influences my speech. It influences my behavior. All of those things are collapsed on top of each other. And I can't get to, for that moment when they're all collapsed on top of each other, I can't get to that sense of true self. Or the other thing that happens is we become what I call the talking head, right? We think that true self is only in the head, is only in the mind, right? And we forget the other parts. We forget all the other parts of ourselves. And then true self is not available either, right? Because we're separated, because things are separated. It's only when there's this sense of alignment, where this for me, this sense of integrity when I'm in integrity with myself, that's a quality that promotes more deeply getting at true self for me. So this whole thing about yoga and recovery, right? Both yoga and 12-step recovery talk about healing rooted in learning how to dwell in silence and trying not really to fix anything, that it's not a matter of fixing. It's speaking of opening to the full spectrum of the human condition without wishing for anything to be different, right? It's not about techniques or quick fixes. Rather, it's about developing a way of being that helps us to see ourselves differently. And it's a rotation in consciousness that shifts our relationship with the world and opens us to new degrees of freedom. And the yogic approach to this talks about how we reintegrate these things at all levels. At a structural level, how do we bring this reintegration at a structural level to our bodies? At a functional level, integration of our values with our actions. At a psychological level, at the mind-body state. At a social level, in how we relate to others. And at a spiritual level, the interconnection between all things. So the 12-step program and yoga really have the same goals. That goal is transformation. Self-transformation is the goal of both yoga and the 12-step program. And transformation requires the acknowledgement and acceptance of the nature of addiction to our dysfunctional behaviors and patterns. What we always talk about is how we're looking in healing addiction to make our intentions stronger than our dysfunctional behaviors, to make our intentions stronger than those patterns, those dysfunctional patterns. Both yoga and the 12-step program say that in many ways, most all of us are addicted in some way, right? That at the least, Patanjali talks about how our vrittis, how we can become addicted to the way we process our reality. He says we're all that's pretty much what avidya is. We're addicted to the way we process our reality, right? And freedom means examining this conditioned mind that creates that level of conditioning that supports that, right? So it says we are all addicted to our thinking patterns, our defenses, and our way of doing things. And purification, again, requires removing the contaminants, being truly conscious, stepping back from our compulsions, from our attachments. It requires a change in operating system. And I love that. It's almost the same thing that we were speaking about the other night when Dr. John Kelly was here. He spoke about how the Big Book talked about a psychic change, that sense of a psychic change. That's the way it's described in the Big Book, right? But the way it's described here, and I assert that this is what Patanjali is saying as well, we need a change in operating system, right? In order for the healing for this to come. We're looking for this at a level of a change in the operating system. Atma-vidya, or self beyond identification and attachment, this is said to be yoga's highest goal, right? Our self beyond our attachments and identification. So I believe this is the last slide, right? This is that same model that we were looking at earlier, the Panchamaya Kosha model. And what we assert that if we're really healing addiction, we need tools to address not one body, not just the mind, not just the physical body, but all 5 of the bodies. And they're tools from both yoga and the 12-step program that can support us in developing this sustainable platform for addiction recovery, right? So that this can be something sustainable in our own lives, right? And, and here they are, right? Those tools. Anandamaya, there's nutrition, exercise, yoga asana, sleep, rest. For the Manamaya kosha, chanting, mudras, pratyahara, community support, right? Relationships. For Pranamaya kosha, of course, pranayama practices, nature, whole foods. For the V Gianna Microtia, meditation, 12-step meetings, CBT or other cognitive practices, contemplative or spiritual practices. All of these things are things we can use to support a sustainable platform for addiction recovery. And I love how they include both yogic practices as well as practices from the West. And I think that's it. So I want to thank you all. Thank you so much. I know that tomorrow, we don't have time for questions now, although I'd love to have any of your questions, but I think we're going to do a panel tomorrow. And so I would love to, anything you think about relative to a question, please write it down and we will be happy to address all of those things. So I want to thank you very much. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.